Now let's take a look at how we can work with our code just a little bit better in working with CSS. So I'm going to have you go back to your selector.html, and again, if we don't have that open, we did save that, so I'm just going to click on Don't Save My File here, and I'm going to go to My File and Open, or I can use my Files panel, and I'm going to open back up, because we did save it at one point, my selectors.html. So it's just back to its default at this point, which is just fine. So when I'm working with my CSS, there's times when I would like to add items or change items. And with changing things and making sure that things are laid out the way that I would like, there are several different ways that I can do that. My first way that we really haven't looked at all that much so far is working with my property inspector. So if I put my cursor in a particular element on my page and I click on my CSS properties, I see that it is my targeted rule at the moment for that H1, H2, etc. If I click on this, I see my cascade. So I see that I've got my body, container, content, and then this. Now, this doesn't really tell me a whole lot. If I would like to make a new CSS rule, I can do so in here. A new inline style, I can also do that at this point. And my inline style would be around that particular item. And I'm not going to create that just now. We're going to do that when we take a look at the code and make sure that you know how to do an inline style. If I click back on that, I also see that I could apply a class style from here as well, or remove a class style. And I get just a list of all the class styles that I have available. If I just highlight a little bit of text here, and again I'm just going to highlight this once, and I can say my new CSS rule, or I could again apply one of my rules from here. Now, only when I'm in my HTML properties and I take a look at my class styles do I get a better actual view of what that might entail. So I get a tiny little bit of preview, whatever it can give me a preview of what that class style might actually look like. So heaven forbid, I should say header, and now that is highlighted just like the header style up here. Because it's a class style, I can apply that anywhere inside of my page. And I'll just say none. And I will click over here again, and if I were to take a look at my current in my CSS styles panel, I see a summary for that particular selection. So it is taking on my body rules. It's also taking on the color from my body. It is showing me that it's a margin of 0 and a padding right and left of 15. So if I roll my cursor over here to the left, I can disable that particular bit of my property. So it doesn't matter if I do it on right. Here I'll do it on left, and I'll just click that. And all of my padding for my H1 through H6 and my P tags is now gone for my padding left. Now if I take a look at my links over here on the right hand side of my page, I notice that my cascade goes from hover and my visited and my a hover, a active, and a focus. And by the way, my focus is so that somebody navigating by keyboard will have the same hover experience as somebody who's actually clicking on my page. So I can decide up here what I maybe want to get rid of, and if I get rid of my background color, then you see it looks like it does in the rest of my sidebar. It's gotten rid of that nice green color over there. So now I'll come back over to my file. And once again, I want to make sure that you're aware of what happens when you don't have your default font declared in your CSS. So far, everything that we've looked at and everything that we've done, we've actually had a default font. But what if we didn't have one? So then we'd be at the mercy of the browser. The browser would then in its preferences say what the default font was for our page. Really the default everything for our page if we didn't have something already selected. The end user, whoever's looking at our website, could also have their own style sheet, and then that would take precedence over the basic defaults that the browser has. So we need to be aware of those things when we're making our style sheets, and take into consideration that if we don't cover all of our bases, then the browser might do it for us. So as my cursor is sitting here, I'm noticing my code navigator. So once again, my code navigator I could either click on at the moment, and that would bring up that code navigator. If I'm on my PC, I could hold down my Alt key, and on the Mac I could hold down my Command and Option key, and when I click, I bring up my code navigator, and when I roll my cursor over each individual item, it tells me the properties and values for that particular rule. Notice that I have my padding left on here still, and if I were to click on this here now, that would take me to that in the code itself, which is really handy because there's sometimes when you have a very long style sheet and you're not quite sure where that item is and you want to see it in the code, not necessarily in your CSS styles. Maybe you want to move some things around. Using your code navigator is really handy. Let me go back to my design view. So I'm going to click back on and enable that particular property. There we go. So I have my padding left back in my page. And if I highlight this, let's say that this is part of a quote. So in my property inspector, in the same little grouping of buttons as my unordered list and ordered list, I also have my block quote. And if I click on that, I now have an extra indent for that particular block of code. And now I can style this however I want in CSS. So if I want nice big quote marks in my page, or if I want this surrounded by a rounded rectangle, etc., it's actually up to me now. And once again, just making sure that we know that we can click on Inspect. It's going to also turn on my live view, and when I roll my cursor over these items, I can see the padding and margins for that particular element on my page. So hopefully now you're more familiar with working with your CSS.